Hello, friends, and welcome to the second episode of Rated L for Lore. I am your host, Ashley Day, and I just gotta say, thank you for coming back for episode 2. Today we will be discussing a game from 2010 that brought fame to YouTuber PewDiePie, back when he still made gaming videos. This game is a first-person, single-player survival horror game that I honestly didn't remember much of, except being made to feel very uneasy and getting jump scared. However, it is a game with a pretty great story packed with some quality lore. The game we will be discussing in this episode is Amnesia: The Dark Descent. So, let me set the scene for you. The year is 1839. It is late August when a young man by the name of Daniel wakes up in the dark and deserted halls of Castle Brennenburg, unsure of where he is or really who he is. He gets up. The only thing he can remember is his name, that he is from Mayfair, and the fact that he is being hunted by something. He has a note on him that he had written to himself that tells him he had deliberately erased his own memory and is being hunted by the Shadow. He does not know what the Shadow is, but there is one other thing on this note that he left for himself. Find Alexander and kill him. But this leaves us with a few questions. How did Daniel get here? What led him to this point? Who is Alexander? Now, my research comes from a mix of Wikipedia, the Amnesia: The Dark Descent wiki page, and the channel Lore on YouTube. Together, I have compiled a good timeline of the story that I will be sharing with you guys in this episode. So, we'll start at the beginning of this story. Despite having a terrible fear of the dark, Daniel goes on an expedition to Algeria with Professor Herbert and team, who sought to excavate the tomb of Tin Hinan, or Hinan, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, which was buried in the Algerian desert. While separated from his men in the tomb, the entrance collapses, trapping Daniel inside, which forces him to go deeper in hopes of finding a way out. Deep within the tomb, he discovers a mysterious orb that he feels calling to him. When he picks it up, he is in a trance. Hours later, he is rescued and sent back to England with the orb to hopefully learn more about it. Daniel returns to England to seek out more information on the orb, but soon learns that the rest of his expedition group has disappeared. He also starts to realize that anyone he contacts in regards to the orb dies. Daniel continues to send letters asking about the orb when he receives a letter from the Baron of Brennenburg, Alexander, who offers him protection in his castle. Fearful and confused by the orb's powers, Daniel accepts Alexander's invitation and goes to Castle Brennenburg. After arriving at the castle, Alexander explains that Daniel is being followed by the Shadow, which is the guardian of the orb that will kill anything in its way so that it can reclaim the orb for itself. Alexander then convinces Daniel to use the orb's power to fight back. Deep within the castle, Alexander shows him rituals to temporarily banish the Shadow, which involves torturing prisoners in the castle who are supposedly criminals. As a part of torturing these prisoners, Alexander tells Daniel they need to collect vitae, which is a substance that is secreted in the blood during times of stress. Daniel uses an amnesia potion on prisoners so they can be tortured multiple times to collect as much vitae as possible until they die. Alexander then kidnaps the family, killing the father and imprisoning the mother and daughter. The daughter escapes, but is killed when Daniel finds her. Feeling remorse for his actions, Daniel loses faith in Alexander, realizing that the prisoners they have been torturing aren't criminals, but in fact innocent people. Sickened and broken by his actions, Daniel takes the amnesia potion himself, vowing to get revenge on Alexander for turning him into a monster. This is what sets up the beginning of the game. The player learns all of this through letters and diary entries left by Daniel throughout the castle, as well as flashbacks and visions that Daniel has. It is later revealed that Alexander is actually a being from another dimension and uses vitae to prolong his life. He was banished to Earth years ago and established himself as a baron, but now wants to use the orb to travel back to his dimension as he fears the other nobles no longer trust him. As Daniel gets closer to Alexander in the inner sanctum of the castle, he finds Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, who had once studied the orb but is now being kept alive and captive by Alexander. He tells Daniel that he and his student, Johann Weyer, learned how to use the orb's powers to travel between dimensions and instructs him on how to reach Alexander to stop him from using the orb to do just that. Agrippa also asks Daniel to take his head with him and throw it in the portal once Alexander opens it. Once Daniel reaches the inner sanctum, the player can then get 3 possible endings. These endings include Daniel's ending, otherwise known as the revenge ending, where Daniel ruins Alexander's ritual and he leaves Castle Brennenburg after the shadow kills Alexander. He is still riddled with guilt over his actions, but he feels better knowing Alexander is no longer alive. The second possible ending is Alexander's ending, also known as the bad ending, where Daniel does nothing to stop Alexander's ritual, so he escapes through the portal. After Alexander flees, Daniel hears the voice of all the prisoners and the little girl that he murdered begging for mercy before he himself is killed by the shadow. The final possible ending is Agrippa's ending, which is also considered the good ending. In this ending, Daniel puts Agrippa's head into the portal before the preparation is complete. The shadow then consumes both Daniel and Alexander. Alexander's body dissolves into a blue light, while Daniel collapses to the floor. A floating blue light then appears in the distance and Daniel walks toward it, while Agrippa speaks to his former student, Weyer, telling him to help Daniel. It is unknown what happens to Daniel in this ending. Some speculate that he is resurrected by Agrippa and Weyer through the help of something within one of the other dimensions. Other people speculate that he died. Personally, my whole thought on this is that Alexander is kind of condemned to hell, which is why he disappears into that blue light, while Daniel is then taken to heaven, and that's what this light represents. Now, I could be wrong. This is just my theory on it. So this is just the main premise and storyline and lore of the game. But there is a lot more to be uncovered here before I am done with you guys for this episode. Another thing that I would like to talk about is Agrippa and how he really fits into all of this. So, basically, Agrippa came into contact with the orb in an ancient temple near, I'm going to butcher this, Alstadt. Right after encountering the orb, the shadow pursued him and caught him, but instead of killing him, the guardian chose to spare him. However, he did not speak of this for about a decade just out of fear. He later came into contact with Alexander and decided to work with him to study mystic relics. Alexander managed to later recover Agrippa's orb in order to power his machine in an attempt to get back to his dimension, prior to when he tried to with the help of Daniel. However, he botched his attempt to perform the final ritual, and so Agrippa's orb was shattered into many, many, many pieces when he prematurely activated it. By this time, Agrippa is an elder, and so it is easier for Alexander to overpower him and keep him as a prisoner after his former student, Johann Weyer, escaped to the other world. This enraged Alexander because he was unable to return to the world that he was banished from, his soul being trapped inside a dying husk of a body, and the only way to keep him alive is by using vitae. Alexander wanted to further study the orbs, but he did not have another one, since he had shattered the one that Agrippa had had. Also, Alexander wanted to keep studying the orbs with Agrippa and Weyer, but Weyer wanted to free Agrippa, so he gave Alexander the formula for a potion that would release Agrippa from his body. He offered to take Alexander back to his own world, but Alexander was unwilling to trust Weyer and decided to keep Agrippa prisoner instead of freeing him. This is where Daniel encounters Agrippa, finding that Alexander had been torturing him, mutilating his body, but still keeping him alive. It is here that Daniel is asked by Agrippa to create the potion that Weyer had given the formula to Alexander all those years ago, so that he may be free from his useless, mutilated, and unmoving body. It is thought that Agrippa may be telepathic, because when asking questions to Daniel, he does not wait for an answer, as if he knows exactly what Daniel is going to say before he can even say it. Apparently, Alexander might also share this ability, though it is entirely possible that the game merely omits Daniel's dialogue here. In the game, Agrippa is used as a plot device to resemble Daniel's morality. If the player chooses not to save Agrippa, Daniel will be depicted as selfish and hateful, and if the player makes an effort to save Agrippa with Wire's tonic, Daniel will be depicted as charitable and sympathetic. These choices also affect how Alexander first responds when finally confronted. If the player goes through with Agrippa's ending, aka the good ending, Agrippa's voice is heard calling Daniel a good character that deserves so much more. So that is Agrippa, but another big thing that I would like to talk about before concluding this episode are the Gathers, which are Alexander's loyal servants and the primary enemies in the game. The things that cause a lot of the jump scares in the game, and I felt it would be doing a disservice to this game if I did not talk about the game's main enemy as well. So there are two different kinds. There are the Grunt and the Brute, and these enemies patrol the castle and attack Daniel. The only way for the player to escape them is to run and hide, since Daniel is weaponless, so he cannot fight them off. Now, their origins are unknown, but there is a note in the archives that hint at their origins, and this note says, This story reaches all the way back to the time of the 30 Years' War. It is said that soldiers who abandoned their duty got lost in the cold, dark woods and were forever damned to roam the grounds. Their bodies, wrought by their tainted souls, have left them disfigured and empty of essence. Many have cited them over the years and described them as horrid revenants. They move silently through the woods, shying away from any beholder. They are called gatherers, as they seem to follow some ambition to steal living creatures. It is their prey which can be heard struggling inside damp burlap sacks, dragged behind them, which reveal their presence. What dark scheme do they follow? So, that is that note. Kind of dark and sad and tragic, actually. So, some theories about their origins are that these creatures were originally soldiers, as the note in the archives suggests, who deserted their stations and got lost in the woods, presumably near Castle Brennenburg, which strongly implies that their disfigurement is a consequence of drinking Alexander's poisoned wine, which causes the drinker to violently rupture from the inside, as you see in the room in the wine cellar where Wilhelm leaves his note. There are snippets of audio from a flashback when one of Wilhelm's men mentions that his chest is about to burst, and another pleads for Alexander to let them go. And these snippets of audio are titled Transformation in the game's files. Their lack of essence may hint at the fact that they have been drained of vitae. However, since they are still wandering around and not dead like the rest of Alexander's experiments, this can't be known for certain. Assuming that Alexander was behind their transformation from men into monsters, these creatures have been servants since the 1600s, capturing live humans for Alexander's experiments. So, the process for turning from a human into a gatherer is only hinted. The only evidence is given by the note, which describes the fate of Wilhelm and his men who had their bodies deformed after drinking tainted wine offered by Alexander. Probably just drinking the wine, quote unquote, because we're not sure it really is wine, isn't really enough evidence, and more steps probably have to be taken, like binding them to Alexander's will and grafting the metal pieces into their limbs to keep the bones in place. It is speculated that Alexander only turned strong-willed and robust subjects into gatherers, like the soldiers and Wilhelm's men. These men could be used to pain during their military training and experience, thus making them inadequate subjects for vitae extraction, but effective for the gatherer's role thanks to their strong build. So, that's pretty much all I have for you with Amnesia: The Dark Descent. I'm sure there are other theories to be had and more lore, so if there are that I just don't really know about and haven't covered here, feel free to send me a submission to my email at ratedlforlore@gmail.com. You can also send in any submissions or theories or your thoughts on Facebook at ratedlforlore. You can chime in on Instagram, where I want to try and hint at what different episodes are for every week, which is also at ratedlforlore. You can also connect with me on Twitter at @4_lore. You can find our podcast on Spotify and Stitcher, as well as Apple Podcast. And make sure to leave a review, because that helps me out a lot. Also, share any of these episodes around, because that also is really, really, really helpful, and I would really appreciate it. Also, you can listen to episode 3, which is also out now, today. So, isn't this exciting? You get 3 episodes in one day. I'm probably never going to do this again, but hey, you never know. And you can also stay tuned until next Monday, when episode 4 will be released. But yeah, seriously, go check out episode 3. It's really good, I promise. And as always, thank you for listening to episode 2 of Rated L for Lore, the second podcast of its kind to talk about video game lore and theories. I am your host, Ashley Day, and I will see you in the next episode. Have a lovely day, you beautiful, beautiful people.